So yeah, I've probably been doing this probably about 35 years. So the last job I had was in hospice, and that gave me a whole different set of skills, and I truly enjoyed it.
Mm,
Um, but today we're going to talk a little bit about grief and some of the different aspects of that. We I think when we talk about the sacred shadow, and that meant to me that as I don't know, I guess in this culture we don't really teach people how to grieve, or we don't teach
mm,
people how that process. We teach a lot of things in this culture. We teach people how to, become independent. We teach them how to handle money somewhere along the line. Sometimes I think we do that a little late too.
mm,
But in terms of grief, it's kind of a individualized set of events. Uh, and I'll give you just a brief definition of grief. Grief generally means to burden. It implies that a heaviness of experience, the sorrows and headaches and affliction of the mind and body,
mm,
emotions and feelings that may be part of the uh, of your grief experience. So basically, grief is not an emotion.
mm.
Um, it's an experience
Experience.
made
Mhm.
up a lot of many emotions.
Hmm.
Um, once it's something that no one escapes, and yet it is one of those aspects that we don't often talk about until we're faced with it. And then, society kind of has a way of passing judgment
Mm,
on how long one should grieve, or what's
mhm,
appropriate, what's not appropriate. And I would just say, just in general, for everybody listening, that I don't think there's any clear, or should there be any clear guidelines as to how long a person should grieve. I think that's a
mhm,
very individualized set of events that each one of us can define differently. And I think grief is as individualized as each and every one of us would be.
mm,
How one handles it, how long it takes. I think when I think about it, the industry tries to usually say, depending on your kinship, they
mm.
decide how many days you can have off if you lose somebody important to you. They'll say, well, if it's your mother, your father, you can have 3 days. If it's an aunt, distant aunt, maybe you get 2 days. But the bottom line is that expectation in itself tries to tell you that in 3 days you should be ready to just assume your full responsibility, just like nothing happened. And that's not normally the case, you know.
Uh,
Um,
Miss Thelma, can I stop you for one moment? I don't want to
sure.
pause this brilliance, but we're getting some feedback that it's hard to hear you.
Okay.
Can you turn your
Oh, I'm
volume up
sorry.
a little bit?
Sure. Let me
Um, yeah,
do that. Okay. Hopefully that's better.
let's hear a little check one, check two.
Is that check one, check two? Is that
I
better?
I can hear her, but I also turned up the volume on mine. So folks who could
Okay.
at first, is that better? And also try turning up the
We getting
volume
we
on
getting
your
any
phone.
feedback?
No feedback.
Okay. So I've got it like at about 80 something here on my computer. So
Okay.
hopefully that they can hear me a little better. One, two, three. Testing.
It's good for me. If folks who can't hear, if you still can't hear, just let us know and maybe play around with your
Oh,
volume as well.
okay.
Let's
All
Thank
right.
you for the feedback.
Okay.
Yes, please continue.
Oh, well, I mean, basically, I think we talked about grief and its many faces. There's a sadness, an anger, a shock, a guilt, a helplessness, and relief. Some people have a little trouble with the relief part. People want to know, what, how can you have relief? about having
Talk about
lost
it.
someone. Yeah, but in hospice, in particular, you
Mhm.
figure someone perhaps is playing the caregiver role, and it's very stressful. I mean, it's hard to imagine that you're taking care of somebody who has kind of a limited amount of time to be here with you, day in, day out. You don't know when it's going to happen, and so there's kind of a strange feeling that when that happens, when the person passes away, that person is somehow relieved of the responsibility and the when question. When is
Mhm.
this going to happen?
That's right.
You know,
There's some
and then
certainty, even
yeah,
if it's
yeah,
a loss. Hmm.
absolutely, absolutely. And sometimes people feel guilty about having feeling relieved that they no longer have that level of responsibility for somebody else. But it's
Yeah.
all, it's all within that realm. There's no wrong or right to that. There's
Hmm.
a lot of feelings that go to that whole grief piece. That and I'll just say another side of that is working in a incarceration environment. Just think of it. I've often been concerned about it because those people don't have a lot of outlets to relieve themselves of their grief.
Yes.
When they're in jail, they'll some family member will call us and say, "Can you tell somebody that's incarcerated? Can you tell that inmate that his mother just died?"
Yeah.
And then they call them out, and
Mhm.
usually they call the mental health team, which is usually me. Then it was me, and I had another counterpart. We'd sit down with them, allow them to make some phone calls, allow them to call the person that called us, so they can officially tell them. But they can't have the normal set of events. They can't reach out, hug, and grab their family members, and it's forbidden for them to hug us. Of course, I've been known to, bend the rules a little bit because I think
Mhm.
under certain circumstances you have to be human,
Right.
and
Right.
allow people some human space. But that's just a few incidences, where it's you know a taxing set of events.
Right. I really want to thank you for kicking off, opening up this complex conversation about grief, because I do think that it is misunderstood a lot. And I appreciate you naming some things. I heard you say was that it's an experience, not just an emotion, and that there's
Right.
a whole set of emotions,
Mm-hmm.
underneath that umbrella. And, what I didn't like to hear, but it's so true, is that we all experience it. We will all experience
Yeah.
it at some point.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
very true. And it's not about being more or less resilient, more or less
Right.
strong,
Right.
you know. It's a part, in some ways, I hear you saying this is part of like our species. This is a part of life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And but we don't, as evidenced by my body's reaction hearing that, we don't live
Mm-hmm.
in a culture that has that acceptance. I feel like we
Mm-hmm.
do a lot of like, keeping hard things at bay, numbing, dissociating, um,
Mm-hmm.
and of course we could talk about the various ways that looks, from spending to
Mm-hmm.
social media to different things. But I just wanted to just reflect that, and also see if Nick, if you had anything at to any feedback.
You're on mute. Unmute yourself.
Trying. Thank you. There we go.
All right.
Um, so like we said, grieving is different for different people. Um, I notice for me, a lot of times my grieving don't happen until later.
Mhm.
I don't grieve at the beginning because it's too much to get done. It's too much that has to be done, and I almost have to plan time to grieve.
Mhm.
Um, I wanted to know, I guess, what is your experience, Mom? I wanted to know what is your grieving experience like? How do you cope with grieving, especially in this time period when we're coming to a moment when we're going into the holidays and we're going into this different season, this fall season. How do you handle your grief and what does it look like for you?
Well, for me, I mean, if I lose someone, um, generally the business of taking care of the arrangements and taking care and making sure is everyone else is okay usually consumes me, and I usually don't take time out to really attend to my feelings until probably after everything is kind of done, everything is over, you know. And another part of grieving is usually around holidays. If you've lost people who are dear to you and you had some rituals, some things, some family kinds of things you did, and you no longer have access to those people physically. Emotionally, people are usually always with you in your heart, or personally with you, but you don't have them physically here anymore. It causes us, some people, to want to honor those people in different ways. But you also have, holidays are not always great for everyone. We assume that everybody is looking forward to the holidays, looking forward to Thanksgiving and family and all that. But for some people, it doesn't represent a positive set of events. It causes me to think of sometimes if a child perhaps has lost a parent and they didn't have good Christmases. Maybe Christmases just brought more attention to the things that maybe they didn't have, and so it brings up different things in different people. I
Yeah.
can remember a while back I did a workshop in the jail setting where we talked about um, grief, not well, sadness, and how to get through the holidays. And sometimes people are so overwhelmed with wanting to purchase and buy things for people. I kind of encourage people to make like coupon books. Maybe you're gonna give give somebody so many hours of babysitting. Maybe you're gonna wash somebody's car or cook for them. And those things require time, not so much money that maybe people don't really have.
Mhm.
So there's different ways of trying to manage, what you have or don't have. But for me, that's, pretty much it. I will reflect on the
Mm.
people I've lost that are not here, and be grateful for the impact, the positive impact that they each had on me, developing me as a person. And
Mhm.
I kind of manage it that way.
Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, something else that is striking me is that thus far we've been speaking of grief in terms of death.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so many other things that, thank you for also for reading that definition of grief at the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's so many things to experience acute loss and whatever the
Mm-hmm.
technical definition is.
Mm-hmm.
And I was your example about working with incarcerated people. I also do therapy and counseling work with incarcerated people. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and it's so much grief around being separated from their families. And
Absolutely.
for LGBT people, it could be grief around also not being accepted by our families. Um, I know for there's a grief in having to have conversations about police violence with Black children. You know,
Mm-hmm.
there's just I feel like we won't like just list all our griefs for the rest of the time, but just naming that, like, there's all kinds of like
Yeah.
loss that I feel like we might see as like capital like O oppression, and then we
Mm-hmm.
have organizations created to fight these things, and we can't forget that there's all actual grief and pain underneath these losses in our
Mhm.
in ourselves, in our relationships, in our families, in our society. Yeah,
Yeah, I agree.
grief and election. Yeah.
It's a very expanded concept. It does reach beyond. There's all kinds of loss. There are people who, you know, lose arms and legs, lose body parts, lose functioning. So there's all kinds of loss, and usually with loss accompanies some kind of grief. An attempt to try to manage what you no longer have access to.
Mm,
Loss of job. Loss of employment. So there's loss is probably unlimited in terms of what and how people respond to different types of loss. You know, so I
yes,
agree. Yep.
yes.
Yep.
Well, I think the next question I wanted to ask is about one of the ways to respond to, so if we're acknowledging one one thing I always think about is this quote about just, I guess, the existential nature of human grief is that at some point, no matter how many privileges, how many resources, at some point, everybody stubs their toe, right? You're going to have to deal with pain at some point in life. And so where I would love for our conversation to go next is um how we use spirit and broadly defined, and I would love to hear your definition of that, to manage these life cycles. Life is a cycle of joy and pain, right?
Right.
And so part of talking about grief is also like, how do we not let it overwhelm, like face it enough to not numb it, and but also maybe not overwhelm. And somewhere in that dance, I feel like is spirit. So I'm curious to know, what is spirit to you, and how have you used spirit in your work and some of these roles that you've talked to us about?
Whenever you talk of spirit, it's important to know kind of the audience. And when I say that, I mean know the individual and where their thought process is about spirit. You certainly don't want to talk about uh, someone's spirit if they don't have a belief system of any kind. If they don't really believe in. So I usually, um, for me, if I'm talking to someone and that's something that they can grasp, or they have a relationship with a, a spiritual being or spiritual thinking or thought that there's something beyond them, then that's something to grab onto and to hold on to as an anchor, and then we might explore how have you handled other losses in the future? I mean, in the past. And if they say, well, I prayed about it, or um, I have a spiritual group of people that I talk to that are supportive. When I think of spirit, I think of supports,
Mm,
and to explore what kind of
mm,
support system people have or don't have access to.
mhm.
So, yeah.
And how have you used spirit? What is spirit personally to you, and what does it look like in your life?
Well, to me, it has always been. Uh, I have a belief system, and in addition to that, I have a pretty strong support system. A group of people that I feel like I can talk to, who are there for me, no matter what it is that I'm going through, and we will sit down, talk about it. They'll help me think about it, figure it out, and help me walk through it. Because sometimes you can't undo whatever it is, can't undo the loss, but people can certainly help you walk hand in hand with you as you walk through it. And so, in incarcerations or even in hospice, a lot of times, uh, I will find out fairly soon if the person has either supports out there in the community that who do you usually talk to when you're
Mhm.
having some issues, and thank goodness a lot of people have somebody that they talk to. And inadvertently, sometimes you as the social worker or the therapist or whatever become a support, one of the links in their
Mhm.
support
Yeah.
system,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Mm-hmm.
So those are things that have kind of worked, for me. When you once you find out who that person usually talks to, or if they have someone they talk to, then that's a place to start to build, to get the help that sometimes the support that they need.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Hmm.
Nick, what you got brewing over there?
When you was when we was talking about spirit, I was thinking about being obedient to the spirit. And what I mean by being obedient to the spirit is moving on something when you feel it.
Mm,
So if I know, um sometimes being in this field, you use your third eye a lot. And when you're using your third eye, you are sensing a person's emotions, you are sensing a person, maybe having some kind of trauma, and being able to go into the spirit. When I think of spirit, I think of a place, I think of a dwelling, I think of a person, I think of a lot of things when I think of spirit. So being available to that person, and seeing what they're going through, is being able to adapt to them, come down with them, to be empathetic in that process of whatever loss they're dealing. So when I think of spirit, that's where my mind moves, is being obedient to my emotions, and being obedient to my feelings, and being open spiritually wise, to be able to connect with someone else to help
what was the last word you said? Being able
them.
to connect with someone else?
Being able to connect with someone else to kind of really help them, or help guide
Yes. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. See, we got a comment here in the chat.
Okay.
Yeah, it definitely is painful. Just for folks who might not be able to read, the comment was, it's painful when people weaponize religion or spirituality against LGBTQ people. Thanks. Absolutely. Um, Weaponizing the spirituality in so many ways, and religion and spirituality is so
Hey,
definitely so painful. And
hey, Holiday.
actually, one moment, we're gonna save questions to the last 15 minutes. So I'm gonna just pause you, and if you could just hold on 1 second. We're gonna open up the floor, and I appreciate that plug there. There's a few more things that we wanted to speak with you about, Miss Thelma.
Mhm.
Um,
Okay.
Back to the spirit thing, and Nick, what you were saying about it's a it's a spirit is a place, it's a thing, it's an emotion for you.
Hmm.
I also another, forgive me if I'm misinterpreting what you said, Nick, but one thing that sounds like, what to me it reminds me at least of what you're saying, and just part of the work I do as an embodiment practitioner, is being obedient to the spirit, is listening to your body and listening to your full self. Now I want to add a caveat, because well, I just want to honor that, you know,
Hmm.
listening to your body. And let's just get real, what we're talking about: sensations, emotions. Oh, I'm shaking, my heart is racing, I've
Hmm.
got my, my palms are sweaty, um I get a headache every time, what have you. So really listening to that. My caveat is just that those very same things we talked about earlier, that keep us away from grief, though, that is when those things also keep us from our feelings, so that disassociate, I think the term disassociation is most appropriate now. So and a lot of this stuff is not conscious, and so we, in this space, and in the work that I do, we're always encouraging people to find tools to quiet themselves, come back to themselves. What am I feeling? What are my sensations? Pull out the feelings wheel that Dr. Gloria Wilcox created, which I love. I might share my screen and show that. Really
Hmm.
locate some emotions, and get into that sort of embodiment practice, for many reasons, but one of them is so that we can listen, be obedient to spirit. You know, if that means call the day off and cry.
Mm-hmm.
The other caveat I want to add though is we can really trauma can have us can trick ourselves and have us be conniving to ourselves in the way of internalize. Let's use the example that our sibling Michelle starts to put out, that we'll unpack a little bit more later, is if you've only heard that being gay is an abomination and therefore there's something wrong with you,
Mm-hmm.
as you're on that journey of healing from that, you're gonna have to unlearn those messages that seem like they're coming from your own mind. So sometimes it can be complex to really listen to yourself. Sometimes it's also a skill of discerning what is my true voice and what is the voice that I have been told.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to offer that and see if y'all had any other thoughts about that before we move on.
Yeah, I mean, I would think one of the things that I think particularly is important is a self-love, and it's easily disrupted or destroyed if people are pretty much labeling you and constantly putting you down. And so I always recommend to people to begin a process of figuring out what it is they're thankful for. Every day there should be
Gratitude practice.
thankfulness will pull you out of a lot of bad places, because there's always someone having a more difficult time than oneself, and you have to grab onto those anchors in order to keep yourself afloat. What I'm saying is, for instance, maybe you lost someone, and they were dear to you, or maybe you lost your job or whatever, and there's somebody else who hasn't worked in months, or there's someone else who had a real tragedy and they lost several family members at one time. And so there's that helps provide a balance. The things are bad, but there's still room that they could have been a whole lot worse. So I'm gonna be thankful that I still have a number of people who are still supportive. There are people who hear and see me for who I am and are not judgmental, and can accept me for who I am, and we become grateful to those people that are out there, and less less focus on the people who are not supportive. It's a way to kind of manage some kind of balance.
Yeah. Yeah, I also want to tease out what you said about spirit being a belief in something else or something greater, as well as support. And I just
Yeah.
want to name that those are two of the number two things on the list of what's required to build resilience.
Mm-hmm.
A belief in something. It could even be that you have, ancestors. It doesn't even have to be an organized religion. It's something that you're tied to something beyond just yourself, um
Absolutely.
and so I feel like you're really dropping some gems just in terms of like part of in terms of the path and the tools of embracing grief is
Mm-hmm.
also how you embrace things that nourish you too. You can
Sure.
better deal with
Absolutely.
the hard and the loss if you have this ongoing practice of things that reflect you, support you, that is greater
Yeah.
than you get inspiration from. That's brilliant. That's brilliant. Yeah.
Thank
Let me
you.
just make
Yeah.
thankfulness. Yeah. I just want to check our list of questions before we oh, it's saying I can't minimize because I'm recording. Uh, okay. So I can't see my questions. Nick, you have those
Oh.
questions?
Yeah, I have the list of the questions here. That's what I was trying to pull up.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I have my phone. Oh, I know what it was. I want you to ask the one about being a supportive parent. I think that was the last one.
Okay. I think it's this one.
And
How
can you
have the
call my
spirit
daddy? That's my. Can you call all the non-supportive parents, please? No, no.
I think it was how has spirit played a factor in or role as a loving and supportive parent of a gay son? What have you learned about
Yeah. And spirit, or just like, I guess also I'm asking, like, did you have to overcome any fears or misunderstandings or hate or whatever to get to a supportive place? And what was that journey like?
For me, I probably had a conversation with Nick, and I told him, I said, there are um, being an African American and being a black male is difficult enough. Piece that I don't believe. First of all, that's just my thought process. I don't believe people pick their preferences. I think we're wired, and we're wired a certain way, and that's for me that's acceptable. That
Mm,
everybody's not wired the same way.
mm,
Somebody likes strawberry, somebody likes chocolate. We got to have them all. Everybody got to like some flavor. And so with that, my thought process was for him is uh, to do what I could to build him for self-esteem purposes and let him know that this is a very small section or part of your life,
mhm,
but the world will put lots of attention on it. But you're to go on with your life regardless to how the world perceives that, because you and I know that you're so much bigger than your sexual orientation. There's so
mhm,
much more to you, you
mhm,
know. And to
mm,
put it probably in the terms of something my mother used to say, which may sound a little weird, but she would say, you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
mhm, mhm,
Whatever is going to be controversial, you still going to hold on to that person regardless, out of love, you know. And so I guess I even had a couple of people say to me, say, well, you have accepted that really well. Don't look like it was problematic to you. I said, because I said my orientation being a social worker is that I'm, not someone who is how can I put it? I take people where they are, wherever they are. You can't begin to work with people unless you're willing to accept where they are and help build them from wherever they want to go. You got some people want to go someplace, and some people never want to travel. They just want to stay in comfort level. And I'm kind of a person who feels like wherever that person is, and that's their comfort level, I'm good with that. If you want to build, we'll build. But if you never want to leave the backyard, and that's your comfort level, I'm not gonna bust you out the backyard. You know.
mm.
So that's kind of how I accepted that. So that
Beautiful.
would be that was
Um,
just my take. And so
Beautiful.
you know
It's a
because
honor to witness. It is.
well,
And for folks who are late to the party, Miss Thelma is Nick's mom. So she happens to also be, she's this veteran social worker, hospice care worker, etc. And this awesome parent who's also like an auntie to me, I have to admit. And I appreciate it. I appreciate it. Um, we're at the time to open up the floor for questions from the audience. So if that's okay with you, Miss Thelma, we'll go ahead and do that.
no problem, no
All
problem.
right. So I know Miss Terry was on deck, I believe. Terry, you still there? Oh no, it was actually Michelle, maybe. Michelle and Terry.
Yes. Yeah, both of us. I'm Terry. Yeah, I made the comment about I grew up in a fundamentalist family, and it was very difficult hearing the future they saw for me, let alone the present, being gay, and some of that has continued through the years, and we certainly see it with a lot of people, and with a large segment of the population in the US trying to legislate against us. And it'd be really hard to have our marriage invalidated or it's endangered. And it's difficult to watch as these things are coming up. And it took me a lot of years to try to deal with some of that from my childhood and in my teens and 20s when I fought coming out, but that's who I am. So thank you.
Thank you for sharing. And yeah, blessings to that ongoing journey.
This is most definitely a journey.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. See another comment here in the chat. At 52, I'm struggling with childhood abuse and trauma. Yeah, Shannon, so sorry. Thank you for your vulnerability and sharing that. Sorry to hear that. And, you know, I definitely had a therapist once that said, you spend your second half of life healing and unlearning from the first half, you know, so yeah,
I believe that.
just a way of being like, you know, at 52 and you might still be healing from it at 62. And
Right.
yeah, trauma has no timeline sometimes.
Well, thank you for having this discussion. I really appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a conversation to be had because, like I said, it's like most of us said, it's just a topic that a lot of us don't talk about. This is a lot of stuff that we keep in to ourselves. So I'm glad that we're having this conversation. I'm glad that people are open to talking about it because it's something that's left unsaid.
I would say that you know, my hat's off to people who are willing to share, because you know, if you don't share it, if you don't put it out there, there's not much opportunity for healing. You know, and so it's an ongoing opportunity for you to continue to grow. And the way in which you carry yourselves and the way in which you become more um, confident in being who you are, you will send a message. You will continue to send a message to the greater society that you are moving forward, and owe you don't owe an apology to anyone for being who you are. So continue to work, continue to stand up and be who you are. Um, there are a lot of things on the horizon politically that, you know, I'm hoping that we, you know, I hate to see us go backwards, you know, and so for me, some of the things about women making decisions about their bodies feels like a step backwards, a step back in time, as if we're not continuing to go forward. And the same thing about, you know, gay rights and marriages, all of that, if it's undone, it's a step going in the wrong direction in my mind. So we just, you know, I just think people just need to continue to be uh, to fight the fight and to stay in the ring to see it through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you for those words of encouragement.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I haven't shared any of my personal thoughts or feelings, and I'll share that. Yeah, I'm someone who, even though I'm a professional feeler, I'm in the feelings business, I do not like grief. I often don't want to talk about it. That is why I chose to talk about it, to make myself fix it. Even but I know people who are only grief practitioners, hospice care workers, but also people who that's their whole medicine is they get with people who are freshly out of divorce or have lost somebody or come back from combat, and their whole shtick is grief, grief, grief. And I'm like, oh, stay away from me. And so it is like, even right now I have goosebumps just sharing that with y'all. My body's having a reaction. But so I try to be gentle and just acknowledge I have a hard time, but just take baby steps to face it, to really feel like you were saying, Nick, just stay with the feeling. Don't just try to escape or hide or numb it. So yeah, it's not even professional practitioners. We aren't perfect, and I'll support other people's grief easier than I am facing my own, so it's in practice.
Same here.
Yep. That's the human element. None of us can escape.
Hmm.
There's some in the comments, but somebody was trying to speak earlier. I think it was DeMarco.
Let's see. DeMarco was talking about the sound.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Yeah. I do see another comment here. Thank you so much. The holidays are very difficult, usually for me, due to the loss/death of my mom, who is the only family member who accepted me and being estranged from the rest of my family. Things are getting easier for me as I have been working through past and childhood trauma in therapy, and I embrace the darkness in my art and music. But it also feels good to feel validated and have this kind of thing acknowledged. Thank you so much, Graham, for that share. That
Thank
is
you. That was really beautiful.
so very real. I just want to underscore a few things I hear in that comment is that your self-awareness, Graham, of when you get more or more in touch with your grief, whether that is you're actually more sad, or that might turn out to be you're just more tired or more angsty and fighty. Whatever that, like Miss Thelma said, it could come out different ways, but the overlying thing is, when, which is the holidays, which is for a lot of us, it's the holidays. I would encourage folks to identify other seasons. Maybe it's a certain time of year where you've historically lost people or lost jobs or something, and identifying like when in the year you feel like you're closer to grief can also be a time for you to know, oh, this season is coming up. Let me go ahead and get my snacks. Let me get my weighted blanket. Let me make sure I'm back in therapy. Whatever it is you do for yourself, let me go back to church, whatever you do for yourself. Having that awareness of when you're most impacted is just such a powerful thing to know about yourself and your loved ones. If they like, oh, every November you start to get snippy around the house, right? Yeah.
Looks like Chris has their hand up, and I wanted to go back to Emily Fox's comment for Sam. But Chris, did you have something you wanted to share?
I did. First of all, it's my first time on this webinar, and I wanted to say thank you guys for having this. I recently lost my mom in June, and I was a caretaker. She was a paraplegic, but she was also very outgoing. And what I'm going through the different stages that Thelma mentioned, sadness, grief, what is it again? Sadness, being mad. I was very mad. Now I'm kind of becoming at peace. I camped all last weekend just by myself, or all last week just by myself, just to reflect and remember my mom. And I feel relief also now. I did feel guilty about that at first, but it is seeming to subside. But my problem is going to our church where we've been going for 9, 10 years. Now when I walk in, everybody, oh, I love your mom. I loved your mom. And it just brings that emotion back to the front. And I weep again over and over again. I mean, how can I get, I don't know that there is really a way, but to get past that, when I'm going to the church to worship, to remember her as well. But I get sad as soon as I walk in there. So I haven't been attending very much. And by the way, my church is the FCUCC where Southern Equality is at.
Oh, okay. On Patton. Oh, nice.
Okay.
Over there.
Yeah, I'm
Any
gonna
suggestions?
say that, Chris, it's it's going to take time for them. Yeah, I think people often feel kind of they don't know what to say to you. They're really attempting to reach out to you, but they don't know that they're kind of extending the grief for you a little bit. They're not giving you enough space so that you can continue to heal. They don't mean they just don't understand it or how they could better approach you. And I'm thinking of ways that, I think what you'll have I think it'll get better in time
Sure.
because as time goes on, and if you can, you'll have to examine how you feel. I know that means you probably have to brace yourself to go to church. You
Right.
want to go, but then you're like, well, there's that other part where they'll be coming up to me and saying things. And
Mhm.
I was trying to think of a good way to 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 say to them. So I mean, basically, you can just tell them. So my mom was an excellent woman, and I'm grateful to have had her in my life, and I know she would want me to go on.
Thank you.
Yeah, and it may sound a little trite, but I think a couple of them will get the message.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah. And thank you. Our condolences for your loss. And I think
Absolutely.
also something else that's coming up is sometimes we have to be boundaried with our grief in terms of setting boundaries with other people, telling them what we need and don't need. Now, I don't mean like make an announcement when you walk into the building, but depending on the relationships and how the comments come and how frequent, you definitely do have the right to say, to actually just be transparent about that. If it's a particular person well, and just say like,
Mm.
right now that actually brings me back to a different place. If you could, I know that you miss her too. If you can not say that, depending on the relationship, as an example of, throughout this process, that you might have to tell people how you want to be supported and how you need to grieve.
Mhm.
Mhm.
I
I
think
see.
that's a very honest way to approach it. And if they really, again, people just feel awkward, and they're trying to come from a place of caring, and actually are probably, like I said, contributing as opposed to helping you get past it. But I, like I said, I think that's a good way of handling it as well. So if she has a good relationship with these people, she can say, whenever you say that, it kind of, I'm trying to move forward. It's almost like somebody pulling me back in a place I'm trying to get past. And we can all be thankful that we had. I'm glad that my mom was here for me, and that that she was a great person. And I'm always going to remember her. And I thank you for taking the time to acknowledge her. You know, it'll those things will. I mean, how many times does someone have to say they're acknowledging your mom, and you in a sense agree with them? How many Sundays do you have to keep going through that same process?
Right.
Somewhere that's got to say, well, she's acknowledging, I'm acknowledging, she's acknowledging. And
Mhm.
the other part of that is it's probably an attempt for them to manage their grief.
Mhm.
It's probably not so much you, Chris. It's probably them trying to manage. Seeing you probably reminds them of your mom.
Mhm,
and how and them trying to manage that loss as well.
mhm. Yeah. Thank you for that. I see we
Mhm.
got some hands raised and a couple of things. How about I'll read the things in the in the comment box, and then Nick, if you want to check in with I see Chris and maybe some other people I don't see.
There's no more hands risen. Chris, do you still have something you want to say, or did you want to? Can you take your hand there? Thank you.
Go ahead,
No,
Chris.
we can take it
Yeah.
down. No, we can take it down. I was trying to get it off of there.
Oh, you already spoke, Chris?
I
That
did, yes.
okay, that was you before. Okay, I didn't put the voice and the name together. So then this next comment was, and we're just about at time, and I want to make sure we get these. The question is, I'm getting, or the statement, duh, I'm getting better at recognizing my triggers. Sorry, let me go up above that. There's some before that. In terms of support slash seeking spirit, what would you suggest as a starting point? We'll come back to that question. We got it in the list. Aaliyah recommended a space heater. I think that was part of our suggestions for how to embrace your grief. I think I was just rattling off like a weighted blanket, therapy, friends, different things, spirituality. So yes to
Mhm.
space heater. Or if you live somewhere hot like us in Atlanta, maybe some cooling device. Um, Comment, I'm getting better at recognizing my triggers just in everyday life. Good for you. I realized recently that I spent most of my life in trigger mode, and it feels so much better now not to be in that constant spiral. And I have learned to see it. Come on, somebody, pause
All right
and
now.
do specific things to comfort and practice positive self-talk and work
Mm.
towards rewiring my brain. Well, y'all, if you were wondering what else to do about all this, Grim just laid it out.
That's
Thank
that
you.
that should
Love
do
it.
it.
He really, they really did.
So these last couple questions for you, Miss Thelma. One is, what are ways to start embracing spirit? And the second is, in larger culture, crying and emotion aren't always supported. But what if you aren't allowed that? In other words, what happens if you can't, if you really do, if you're in an environment where you can't really grieve or
Mhm.
show big emotion? And I mean, there's similar questions. If you're in that, how do you approach spirit? So we'll leave those the last two questions. I see some comments as well, but I think we'll just wrap up with those last two. Take it away, Miss
Okay.
Thelma.
Okay. Well, I mean, I think if you're finding yourself, and that's very common, that sometimes people are pretty judgmental about where you should be in your grief. And what I would recommend a support group, a grief support group, because that group is designed to allow space and opportunities for people to grieve in a normal, acceptable kind of environment. So there are all kinds of support groups, and depending on what it is that your whatever the loss is, you can probably find a support group specific to what it is that you're dealing with. So I would say, surround yourself, get involved with a support group that will allow you to uh, express your feelings and find some coping mechanisms that where it's acceptable. I think it's that's one of the worst things to be. I've heard it. We all have heard it. She should be over that by now. He died 2 years ago. And my thought process is it doesn't have a time limit. And you don't know my triggers, so you don't know. I might have been moving up the hill. You don't know what trigger set me back. And how dare you almost take the position that I don't have a right to manage my grief, without your agreeing with or saying that it's okay. So yeah, find yourself a good support
Yeah, brilliant, brilliant. And we know culturally supportive resources aren't always easy.
group. Right.
we will make sure that in this series, let me just put in the chat, we have a Trans in the South guide. I can't drop the link right now because I can't minimize my screen, but you can just Google that. And it's not just for trans people, for we includes lots of resources across the South for LGBT people, from social workers to lawyers to medical doctors. And we are a few minutes behind. I want to thank our guests. I do see, Emily, thank you for your comment and question about transference. I believe it's about, you know, you have your own grief, clients bring up certain grief that then triggers you, that you take home. I'm so sorry we don't have the time to get to it today, but I want to tell you, you're not alone in that. And I think that just Googling tips on managing transference might be really helpful. And also, you know, in boundary setting, practitioner boundary setting, and being authentic about if something a client is dealing with is taking you back to your own experience so much that it prevents you from being able to have a good boundary as a practitioner, or, you know, or clarity as a practitioner. So I wish we had more time to address that. It's an excellent question.
Yeah, and I would suggest that you know, it's just like anything else. Sometimes you have to remove yourself from that. If you can't if you can't help that client, it's probably better to have another practitioner take on that patient and you move on to someone else, you know, because you're not in a position. I think it's insightful to know what your limitations are
Mhm.
and to pass that person on to someone who can better provide assistance for that person.
Brilliant. Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Miss Thelma. This is just like, why did I pay for a social work degree when I can talk to you?
Well, hey, I thank you very much. This is years and years of hearing
Oh,
lots of things. So
just
it's been a
brilliant.
pleasure. Been a
Thank you
pleasure.
so much for sharing your wisdom and your heart. Thank you for sharing your son with us. Nick, thank you for your wisdom.
Thank
Um,
you.
Folks, this has been recorded. We will be posting the recording on our website in probably about a week or so. Thanks for joining us. We'll be having one more in this series on December 6th, and we'll be talking about creating new, being intentional about your traditions during the holidays, creating new traditions if it's a painful time, and just giving folks a little support before we go into the holiday season. So thanks for joining us,
Okay.
and we'll see you next time.
All right. Goodbye, everyone. Happy
Bye.
holidays.
Happy holidays.
Goodbye. Holiday, my phone. Can you hear me?
Mhm.
Mhm.
My whole computer just froze.
Oh no, we
Like,
didn't know.
like
You should
I
say
don't have no usage of my mouse right now.